When he got into the car, he seemed like the perfect passenger, polite, calm, soft-spoken, with a subtle smile on his face. Nothing about him stood out, and perhaps that was the first warning sign. The race started like any other. But a few minutes later, he stopped talking mid-sentence, fell silent for a few seconds, and then, out of nowhere, he shouted, "Don't listen to him. He lies." At that moment, his body tensed, his eyes changed focus, and his voice seemed to come from somewhere else. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone in the car with a man. I was with several people all sharing the same body. And one of them wanted to hurt me. If you enjoy true stories that feel like something out of a thriller, leave a like, subscribe to Backseat Secrets, and stay with me until the end. Because what happened next made me rethink everything I thought I understood about the human mind. My name is Ethan Miller, I'm 38 years old, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been driving for ride-hailing for about 3 years, more out of necessity than choice. At night, the city changes. It's silent, almost empty. It's like I have a ghost version of Phoenix that only appears after 11. That day, my routine was the same as any other. I left for my run around 10 p.m. after dropping my daughter off at her mother's house. I was already mentally programmed to do about 5 runs and be done by 2 a.m. I don't usually talk much to passengers. I give a brief smile, a nod, and then I continue on my way. I've seen it all, drunks crying, couples fighting, people silent, people talking nonstop. I just observe and let it happen. Some nights the entire ride passes in absolute silence, and I like that. No one expects anything from me. But that early morning, for some reason, I was restless. There was something in the air. You know when you feel like the night will bring something out of the ordinary? That was the feeling. And I'm not even a superstitious guy. Just overly attentive, maybe. The weather didn't help either. The city was hot and muggy, but the sky was overcast. Lightning flashed in the distance, but no rain. It was one of those nights where you feel like you're holding your breath, waiting for something to happen. And it happened. Right on my 3rd run. When the passenger's name appeared on the app, something deep in my stomach churned. It wasn't the name that bothered me. It was the lack of information. Profile without photo. No reviews. Generic name, Michael. No big deal, right? I'd caught rides like this before. But something told me this one would be different. I just didn't imagine how much. The notification arrived at 0:47. It was a short ride, just over 15 minutes, from a residential neighborhood in the north of the city toward downtown. At first, it seemed normal. But when I opened the passenger's profile, I felt that unease again. No photos. No reviews. The name was simply Michael. No last name, no history. The account appeared new or recently reinstalled. This usually happens when someone gets banned from the app and creates a new profile from scratch. I hesitated for a few seconds. I looked at the map, then at the street where he was. It was a quiet alley, but at night it was completely deserted. No businesses, no movement, few security cameras. One of those parts of the city where everything seems to shut down after 11. I considered refusing. But at that early hour, with the ride target still to be met and surge pricing activated, I finally accepted. I did it almost automatically, as if my finger had clicked before I'd actually decided. The app mapped out the route, and I turned toward the pickup point. As I approached, I grew more tense. There was no one on the sidewalk. The streetlights were dim. One house had its gate open, but it appeared empty. I parked in front of the indicated number. I waited. Nothing. I checked the clock. 2 minutes. That's when I saw his silhouette. He appeared on the opposite side of the street, stepping out of the shadows between 2 parked cars. He wasn't in a hurry, but his walk was methodical. Each step was calculated. He wore a black jacket, dark pants, and a cap that hid part of his face. I opened the passenger window, just a little. He approached and said calmly, "You're Ethan, right?" I nodded. He opened the back door and got in. Thus began the race that I will never forget. When he got into the car, I felt the air shift. Not dramatically. Nothing that immediately caught my attention. But you know when someone has a presence that fills the room in a strange way? This was it. There was no strong perfume, no foul smell, no noise. He just existed there with a different intensity. Michael closed the door slowly and was silent for a few seconds before saying anything. He didn't look directly at me. He just stared at the back of the front seat, as if trying to remember why he'd ordered that ride. His voice was low but clear, and when he spoke, he sounded polite. "Thanks for accepting the ride. I know this area isn't very popular at night." I responded with a soft easy and started driving. I activated the route on the app, which plotted a direct route along the expressway to a busier part of the city. He didn't request any music. He also didn't touch his phone. He just watched the streets pass by outside the window, as if searching for something. I tried to make conversation, something light, to break the ice. "Strange night tonight, huh? It's hot, but it looks like it's going to rain heavily." He smiled slightly without showing his teeth and replied, "This kind of weather is great. The city feels suspended, like nothing is quite in place." The answer caught me off guard. It wasn't strange per se, but it also wasn't the kind of thing someone would casually say to a driver. He seemed too comfortable with the silence and uncomfortable with the world. We remained silent for a few minutes, and little by little, I began to notice other details. He was bobbing his head slightly as if listening to music, but there were no headphones. He was also moving his fingers strangely, as if he were counting, but not numbers. More like he was repeating an invisible pattern. I started looking in the rearview mirror, trying not to be obvious. That's when I realized he was mumbling. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a conversation. And he wasn't talking to me, yet he maintained that same calm tone, as if he were completely in control. Only later would I understand that this was not calm. It was containment. The first 10 minutes of the race were silent. Michael seemed lost in thought, or in some kind of trance. But then he started talking to me again. Only something was different. The tone of his voice was still calm, but it wasn't the same. The cadence had changed. The pauses between sentences were strange, as if he were translating his own thoughts in real time. And the words seemed too carefully chosen, almost artificial. "Do you believe in alternate versions of yourself?" he asked, out of the blue. I responded with a light laugh, trying to keep my tone light. "Like multiverse? I don't know. I guess I never really thought about it." He didn't laugh. He just muttered, "Some believe that we are all always divided. Only some can hear the other sides." That gave me goosebumps, but I pretended it was just late-night chatter. Strange people on long runs. It happens. Soon after, he changed the subject. Or rather, he changed his tone. He started talking about politics. Then architecture. Then Mexican food. Everything at a fast pace, with no connection between the topics. As if each topic were coming from a different person trying to seize control of the conversation. And the strangest thing was the way he used his own name. Sometimes he would say, "I like that," but seconds later, he would correct himself with, "Michael likes that," as if he were referring to someone other than himself. I kept my eyes on the road, but inside, I began to feel the tension building. With each new sentence, it was as if I were dealing with someone different. And in the rearview mirror, I noticed his posture changing too. Now he was sitting up straight, almost formal. Now sunk into the bench, with his shoulders slumped. Now turned to the side, as if talking to someone invisible on the other side of the car. None of this felt like a joke. There was no playfulness whatsoever. It was as if there were multiple versions of that man inside the car. And none of them cared about me. I'd driven drunk, drugged, and deranged passengers before. But what started happening with Michael was different. It wasn't chaos. It was chaotic organization. As if each new action followed an internal logic that only he understood. We were on a darker stretch of the avenue when the change happened. Without warning, he stopped looking out the window and leaned forward, between the front seats, as if to whisper something in my ear. Instinctively, my shoulders stiffened. The air inside the car felt denser. He said in a firm voice, but in a completely different tone, "Don't listen to what he says. He lies. He always lies." I remained silent. I couldn't even ask what that meant. Michael returned to the bench, leaned back, and took a deep breath as if he'd just exerted himself. His eyes were wider now. His face looked more tense. His hands trembled slightly. And then he spoke again. But this time, it wasn't the same person. His intonation was thicker, his pace quickened. He spoke like someone in a panic, speaking in loose, disjointed sentences. He shouldn't be here. I told you not to call anyone. Now you're stuck with him. Like always. His body shrank as he spoke, as if protecting himself. And suddenly he began to cry. Silent, real tears. But there was no sadness in the tears. It was fear. Pure fear. As if he were being watched from within. It was at that moment that I understood that I was no longer just a strange passenger. I was with someone who was struggling with himself. Or worse, with something inside it. The change didn't last long. After a few minutes, he took a deep breath and wiped his face with his jacket sleeve. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, he had his eyes closed and his head leaning against the glass. Back to silence. But now, the car was no longer the same. And neither do I. After a few minutes of silence, Michael seemed restored. He sat up straighter on the bench, ran his hands through his hair, and spoke to me in the same soft voice as before, as if nothing had happened. Sorry about before. I think I said too much. I'm going through some things. That simple, almost casual sentence made me more uncomfortable than anything that had come before. He acted as if the previous outburst hadn't happened. As if he hadn't yelled at someone invisible, cried, trembled. And even stranger, as if he expected me to pretend everything was fine, too. It's okay, was what I managed to reply. He gave a small smile and looked at the car's dashboard. I like the silence here. It feels safe. I kept driving, my body tense and my eyes on the rearview mirror more than on the road. He seemed at peace now. But the kind of peace that comes after a meltdown. As if he'd won an internal argument, but only for now. I noticed he'd started talking to himself again. Barely audible murmurs, lips moving quickly, as if he were practicing a conversation. But different from before, now he was smiling. And it wasn't a good smile. It was the kind of smile you see in a mirror and feel like there's something wrong with the reflection. Once again he changed his posture. He straightened his spine, crossed his arms, and spoke clearly. I think we're going to the right place. But the final destination of the ride had already passed. The app showed less than a minute remaining, but he didn't ask to stop. He also didn't say anything about where exactly he wanted to get off. He just continued to sit there, watching. And I began to wonder if someone like him really had a destiny. Or if his destiny was to lose himself inside someone. The streets were nearly deserted when he began speaking to himself. But this time, it wasn't a murmur. It wasn't a whisper. They were different voices, coming from the same mouth. And I'm not just talking about tone. It was as if each one had their own identity, with a distinct way of speaking, pauses, accent, even vocabulary. First, a childish voice. Did you see how neat he drives? He looks like our father. The sentence was accompanied by a light, innocent laugh. For a moment, I wondered if he was imitating a child. But the naturalness was too disturbing to be fake. Soon after, another personality took over, harsh, with accelerated speech. Shut up. He doesn't care about this. He just wants to finish the race and get rid of us. And then a third voice, more paused, as if trying to negotiate with me. Can I call you that, right? You seem trustworthy. Most people aren't. But you listen. We notice these things. I felt cold sweat run down my back. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but every word made it harder. I wasn't just racing anymore. I was on a battlefield, and the battlefield was his body. Worse, each voice seemed aware of me. As if they were all competing for my attention. Some were more aggressive. Others begged for help. He wants to leave. He won't let me. He won't let me leave. You have to stop the car now. Now, understand? He lies. They all lie. Michael squirmed slightly in his seat, as if trying to contain something rising inside him. His eyes shifted focus with each sentence, as if different people were looking out the window at the same time. The tension in the car became physical. The air felt heavy, dense, charged with static. And I didn't know what was scarier, hearing all those voices, or imagining how many had yet to be heard. At that moment, I understood that he wasn't alone. And somehow neither was I. In my head, a silent siren began to sound. That feeling that doesn't scream, but forces you to listen. Something was about to get out of control. Until that moment, I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe a breakdown. Maybe an untreated psychiatric issue. Maybe just another passenger with a broken life and no real help. But something in that multitude of voices told me there was more to it. And that I needed to get out of there. But I couldn't just stop the car. By this point, Michael was no longer a predictable figure. He was completely unstable, and even in his calm speech, there was a latent tension. As if any unexpected movement might trigger something inside him I didn't want to know. I thought about canceling the ride through the app, but I was afraid he would notice. I considered stopping the car, citing a technical problem, but he seemed too alert to accept any excuse. I thought about speeding to a busy area, but that meant more time stuck with him. I was trapped inside my own car. I tried to buy time. I commented something light, almost automatically. "Michael, is everything okay back there? Do you want me to stop somewhere before the destination?" He was silent. For 10 seconds. Maybe less. But for me, it felt like an eternity. Then he replied in a neutral, almost cold voice. "You're worried, aren't you?" I didn't know whether to answer. I just took a deep breath and faked a smile in the rearview mirror. "It's just, well, it looks like you're going through something." He smiled too. But his smile was empty. No emotion. Just teeth and silence. "Don't worry. I'm not the problem." It was the way he said it that put me on high alert. Not what he said, but who said it. Because I was sure, this wasn't the same Michael as before. The voice that came next no longer had any trace of the previous ones. It was more serious. Harder. It wasn't someone in pain. It was someone on attack alert. "You know too much now." He said this, looking straight into the rearview mirror, his eyes fixed on mine. He didn't look away. He didn't even blink. He just said it like someone delivering a verdict. My heart raced. My body stiffened. My hands on the steering wheel grew cold. My mind was already searching for escape routes, open spaces, streets with cameras, anything. But the worst part was the intensity of that presence. It was as if the Michael who'd gotten into the car wasn't there anymore. As if he'd been pushed into a corner inside his own head, and what was in control now was something darker. And with a clear purpose. He leaned forward, but this time it didn't seem like he was going to whisper. It seemed like he was preparing his body for action. His gaze was now judging. Almost animalistic. As if he were sizing me up. "You shouldn't have accepted that race." I swallowed hard. His voice now held firmness and authority. It was that of someone who believed what he was saying and wasn't bluffing. I considered speeding to a nearby gas station, which I knew was open 24 hours. But the street was deserted. No cars. No pedestrians. Just silence and that man in the back seat who kept watching me. He began tapping his fingers on the bench, a steady rhythm. Then he muttered something too quickly for me to understand. Some kind of code. A command. And then he screamed. A dry, direct, angry scream. "Don't listen to him." I almost slammed on the brakes reflexively. The scream came out of nowhere, as if it were coming from within. As if it were trying to silence some other personality, or warn me. For a moment, he was silent. His body still. His face motionless. His eyes still fixed on me. And I no longer knew who I was there with. Not even if that was the last voice. Or just the first of something worse. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just watch anymore. Something was about to happen. I didn't know exactly what, but I felt in my whole body that if I didn't do something soon, I would lose control of the situation. And maybe much more than that. But any direct action could make things worse. If I stopped the car suddenly, he might interpret it as a threat. If I drew attention to what was happening, it could trigger a violent reaction. If I showed too much fear, maybe one of the voices would like that. So I made the only possible decision, to feign absolute calm. I dropped a comment as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Dude, I forgot my tank was almost empty." I'm going to need to stop at a gas station real quick for gas, okay? He didn't answer right away. He just remained silent, staring straight ahead. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, hands steady on the steering wheel, trying to control my breathing. After a few seconds, he responded, but it wasn't one of those aggressive voices. It was that neutral voice. The one that only said what was necessary. Sure, you can go. I drove down the next avenue to the nearest gas station I knew. It was small but well lit and had a 24-hour convenience store. I parked next to the pump, turned off the car, and announced it casually. I'm going to go inside quickly and get an energy drink. It's too hot to keep driving like this. I opened the door slowly without turning my back to him. My heart was pounding like it wanted to drag me away, but I kept my face as neutral as possible. Michael just nodded, and for the first time, he looked away from me. I entered the store, walked to the cashier, and with a slightly trembling hand, called the attendant and said in a low voice, "There's a man in my car. He's acting strange. Very strange. I think he's dangerous." The attendant looked at me for 2 seconds. Then he picked up the phone. "Don't worry. Stay inside." Outside, Michael was still in the back seat, standing still, staring into space. But I knew that inside there wasn't just one person waiting. The police arrived 15 minutes later. Almost an eternity for someone counting the seconds with their heart in their throat. 2 officers approached the car while I watched from inside the store, trying to control the tremors in my hands. When they opened the door, Michael didn't react. He didn't scream. He didn't resist. He just looked at one of the officers and said, "Finally you arrived." They were getting agitated. The officers looked at each other but remained firm. One of them asked me if he had threatened anyone, if he was armed, and if I knew what had happened before he got into the car. I told him the truth. That no, he didn't attack me, he didn't show me a weapon, he didn't try to run away. But at no point was I alone in there. They took him away calmly. Before getting into the police car, he looked at me. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with pity. "You only heard the ones who let you hear. There are others. Better, worse, older, and hungrier." That stayed with me. The way he said it. The certainty in his words. It didn't feel like a fit. It felt like an ancient conviction. I never heard from him again. I don't know if he was hospitalized, detained, or if he just disappeared into the system. But to this day, I think about that race. I think about how many versions of themselves fit within a single person. I think about what happens when one of them decides to take the wheel. Or when they disagree. That morning, I wasn't just a driver. I was an audience member, a witness, and perhaps an accomplice to something I'll never be able to explain. And the truth is, since that night, I have never been able to trust a passenger's silence again. If this story left you with any questions, comment below. Do you think it was mental illness? Or was there something beyond logic at play? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the Backseat Secrets channel, and activate the bell. Here, each race could be your last, and the next story could be even more incredible.